Humans have always explored different lands. However, in 1972, some 50,000 people with origins primarily from the Indian subcontinent found themselves looking for refuge in another country for a different reason, because they were all expelled from Uganda. Many of them who came to Australia commemorated 50 years of this event by sharing their stories at the special function held at the Australian National Maritime Museum at Darling Harbour in Sydney. The Australian National Maritime Museum was chosen as the venue due to the museum's significant contribution to migration. The arrival of waves of more than 10 million migrants is a foundation narrative of modern Australia, infusing our country with more than 200 different cultural and linguistic traditions. The museum incorporates the National Monument to Migration, previously known as the Welcome Wall, which pays tribute to some 40,000 migrant families, including some from Uganda. This memorable event, attended by families and friends, provided the perfect platform for sharing the trials, tribulations, and triumphs of these Ugandan migrants.
Welcome, family and friends. On behalf of all present, we would like to begin by acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation as the traditional custodians of the Bummal and Badu, the lands and water on which we meet, and we pay our respects to their elders, both past and present, and to all First Nations peoples.
On behalf of the Chairman and members of the Australians from Uganda 50 Years On Steering Committee, we extend a warm welcome to you all to this historic and milestone event.
So I'm Amita Patel.
And I'm Dr. Lynette Gomes-Sardinia.
And we have known each other since our childhood. In fact, we were both among the 50,000 Asians of Indian origin who were expelled together with their families by the notorious Idi Amin in 1972.
Let me share one of my earliest memories when I was just 3 years old. It was at a Christmas party at the Ginger Club in Uganda. Santa Claus gifted me a toy kangaroo stroller on wheels, way before Idi Amin's time. Little did I realise it was important for the future.
And as a 9-year-old living with my parents, Jayanth and Urmila Patel, brother Sanjay and sister Aarti in Kampala, October 1972, and the few months prior, a memory of bustle, packing and hushed adult conversations. There was excitement and trepidation when my dad came home one day and announced we were moving to Australia, a country I knew nothing about apart from koalas and kangaroos. So Lynette, how did you come to leave Uganda and come to Australia?
Well, the choices for my parents, Lasser and Ruth Gomes, were Britain, as they were on British passports, or Canada or Australia. And I remember them sitting us down one day and asking my brother Lavia and I our preference. Our family of four made a unanimous decision for Australia. I mean, it was the land of sunny skies and opportunities. It was not a difficult decision. We applied and were granted an interview. Now, that interview happened in Kampala and for rather regrettable reasons remains imprinted in my memory, was with Mr. John Paddock, who many of you would know was Australia's cultural attaché to Uganda. As a child, an addicted bookworm, I had my nose buried deep in a Nancy Drew novel, and I refused to put it down despite my poor dad frowning at me as Paddock ushered us into the office for that very important interview. Paddock talked with my mum, dad and my brother and then turned to me. And to my surprise, as I had continued to ignore my dad's glares and continued reading, he reached over and asked to see my book. There followed a series of questions about Nancy Drew and her adventures, all of which I happily answered, whilst triumphantly looking at my dad. Paddock looked pleased and said that he too liked Nancy Drew. Australia's cultural attaché to Uganda was a Nancy Drew fan. That sealed Paddock forever in my mind at school and made me long to come to Australia more than ever. So my mum, my brother and I left Uganda in December 1972. We left from Entebbe Airport and my father saw us off and then stayed back in Ginger to finalise our affairs.
So did you come straight to Sydney?
No, actually we left. We had our pet African grey parrot Tutsi with us and we desperately wanted to take him to Australia, but Australia had very strict quarantine regulations and it basically precluded that, and it might even have meant the death of Tutsi. We didn't know whether the climatic conditions in Australia would be suitable. So we took him to Goa and got him settled. We spent almost 3 months in Goa before arriving in Australia on the 6th of March. How about you, Amita? How was it like for your family?
So very similar to yours, Lynette, but a bit of excitement at the time of leaving Uganda. At Entebbe Airport, the family was separated and there were male and female queues to go through immigration at the airport, and my brother and father went through one and my mum and sisters went through the other. And then my father didn't appear on the other side, and my brother was brought by a stranger, and my brother was crying, telling my mum that dad had been detained. And her enormous anxiety and distress conveyed itself to us. We were all very, very scared that we would never see him again. People were disappearing. And her friend Banu kept reassuring her, and they were all praying. I can remember that, I was 9. At last my father appeared intact. He had been interrogated and soldiers were looking for money, of which he had none. We were living with a bare minimum of cash and a suitcase each.
Did you come straight to Sydney?
No, like you, we went to India. My dad had not been there since he'd been a very little child. His life was in Uganda, and he had always wanted to go to the Taj Mahal, so he took the family there. We also went to the World Expo that was on in New Delhi at that time, went to the Australian Pavilion, and it was my first introduction to this beautiful land down under, and we came away with show bags full of little goodies. It was great.
So each one of us has a story to tell. We would like now to share a few of these stories of some of our fellow ex-Ugandans, but before we do that, let's watch this brief video compiled by RF Panjwani that sets the scene.
His Excellency, President for Life, Field Marshal Alhaji Dr. Idi Amin. And that's not even the full title Uganda's former president bestowed upon himself. In 1971, Idi Amin ousted his former ally, Milton Obote, in a military coup. Initially, the new leader's arrival was met with jubilation. Soon that changed, as Amin's ruthless brutality became apparent. Over 8 years, the president eliminated any who opposed him. By the end of his reign, around 300,000 civilians had been killed at the hands of a man who came to be known as the Butcher of Uganda. Amin's presidency was filled with controversial policies, none more so than his decision to expel Uganda's Asian population. Despite making up only 1% of the country, they were responsible for around 20% of the national income. But Amin didn't see them as beneficial to his nation. In fact, he accused them of being disloyal and sabotaging the economy.
The Uganda still not yet independent. Uganda will be independent after this, my decision, after I want to see that the whole Kampala street is not full of Indians. It must be proper black, and administration in those shops is run by the Ugandans.
Many had spent their lives building successful businesses. Amin gave them just 3 months to leave. In an instant, an entire community lost everything. Many of the 80,000 forced to flee ended up in the UK and prospered. but Uganda's economy did not. In the 3 years following their departure, GDP fell 5% and inflation rose rapidly. The president's mismanagement was bringing the economy to the verge of collapse, but it was his decision to attack Tanzania that ultimately brought him down. Amin ordered his forces to invade. They failed. Soon, Tanzanian troops were closing in on Kampala, and Amin quickly fled. His departure was met just like his arrival, with Ugandans celebrating on the streets. Muhammad Walji, The Newsmakers.
People want to get out very fast, and the situation is so chaotic that they can't get out. At the same time, they are being told to get out, and all the other governments are being blamed for not processing the documents very fast, and all that jazz is going around. But they are not allowed to get out very fast. You see, the trouble is that.
What sort of treatment, actual physical treatment, have Asians like yourself and your relatives and your friends been receiving?
Well, physical treatment, I would say quite a few people have been killed by the army, shot point blank. If I know one person who had a British passport, and he was asked why he has not gone yet. He said, look, my papers are not yet complete. I don't have approvals from Bank of Uganda and other departments. I can't leave. So, well, he was shot just for that. I would say it's very terrible it's very dangerous for women, any women, for Asians or Europeans for that matter, to be in Uganda at this time.
What, you feel they stand in grave danger of being molested and raped,
that's
perhaps?
Right, yeah. That could happen.
Would you say, from the experience of you both, that the situation was somewhat anarchic? Was it a wild, confused scene in Uganda at this time?
Yeah, it's confused. Everybody is apprehensive. Nobody knows what can happen in the next hour. There is no security whatsoever. Anybody can pounce on you anytime. Security forces or the police or the army or the people themselves.
You're both now very much going to have to change your ambitions and your lifestyle and all sorts of things, aren't you?
That's we have to adapt to the conditions here and get used to the people here. But the one consolation here is people, that think that's the main. There's security here.
There are others who are just as highly qualified as you who would like to come to Australia.
Yes, especially for Australian authorities, I'll tell you, because when I went and talked with the attaché down there, he told me, not directly but indirectly, that he is taking Asians from there, not on sympathetic ground whatsoever. He's taking on qualifications, and it takes a week. The cable comes to Canberra, and they certify whether they want a particular person down here in Australia, and only those people get in. Now, he's in a university, and he did his mechanical engineering. I did my electrical engineering. I've got 8 years experience in plastic and etc., all sort of industry work, and as a lecturer, part-time lecturer. We qualified, but there are two of his chaps, classmates, mechanical engineers, but not lecturers, and Mr. Fadik said, I'm sorry, you are qualified, but we do not need you now in Australia.
Well, why did they make this discrimination?
No,
This is the reports from Canberra saying that these are the following are the qualifications that Australia requires.
I walked this path because I had to. I began a journey that I was forced to. Enemy shunned us. Doors closed behind us. Frozen, we gazed at the horizon sky. We didn't know why, we didn't know where, but we believed. We believed. We believed the air of freedom would circle again. New beginnings in a stranger's land with strangers' faces and a stranger's hand. A child's promise of tomorrow, raising hearts to hope. I walk this path because I want to. We walk this path together anew.
I was born and raised in Kampala, which is the capital of Uganda, in a place called Namirembe Road. This was in my grandfather's house and it was opposite the Kabaka's palace. Those of you who have any history of Uganda know that he was the king of Uganda in the province called Uganda, and they all used to speak a language called Uganda. And it's interesting that when I went to work in the hospital, you either had to learn it or at least bits of broken Uganda because you couldn't work otherwise. So that was another story in terms of what happened. When I actually graduated from university in Makerere, I worked at Malaga Hospital, and the hospital was a teaching hospital built by the British, mind you. It had 2,500 beds, and most of the time it had 4,500 patients. One in each bed. And that's when I was a resident. And the worst time I had, I think, was when I was in the children's acute care unit, where in fact, you'd see a lot of young kids dying of malnutrition. So in Africa, there's a story, the father gets fed first, then the mother, then the kids. As you can imagine, that's why we had problems. It's a cultural thing, so you can't combat it quite easily. Now, when I was a resident doctor, I actually had to put intravenous drip into one of Idi Amin's wives. He had 4 wives and umpteen mistresses and God knows how many children. And when she came in with a dehydration, here I am putting a drip, and there was an army security officer with a submachine gun pointed at my head. I don't know what he wanted to do, but boy, did I not miss that vein that day. And when I came to Australia, I never missed an intravenous drip. So in 1972, when Idi Amin ordered the expulsion of all the Ugandans, my family decided to flee the country in stages. The irony of it is, and I was doing an interview with Ben Fordham on air today, as some of you may have heard, he asked me how I got to Australia. Did you know anything about Australia? I said, no, apart from the geography lesson I had at school. But after that, when I actually got here, people, before you get here, they say, oh, I had all my documents to go to Canada. And I said, why didn't you go to Canada? I said, well, I lined up and the Canadian embassy was closed for lunch. It's true. And they were all in unison with each other. And the Australian embassy had a secondment from a man that you heard about, John Paddock. For those of us who immigrated here, John Paddock was, I think, sadly no longer with us, was a saviour. So I got interviewed by him and he said, well, you're in the category of doctors and teachers, so you're in, mate, he said. And 2 days later, I got a visa to come to Australia. They rang me and I went there and he gave me the visa on a piece of paper. And I said to him, why isn't it in my passport? He said, because you'll be in danger because you're essential services. So can you afford to get a return ticket to Australia and pretend you're going on holidays? And I said, yes, I can. And he said, good, well do that, and basically what will happen to the piece of paper when I get up? He said, don't worry about it. You'll go to Nairobi airport when you leave Entebbe, which is the airport, and basically you won't be able to get out there. You have to sleep on the bench for 1 or 2 days until the connecting flight to Mauritius comes, and then from there the Qantas flight from Johannesburg will bring you to Perth. And I thought, here's a man who actually knows what's actually going on while we're all in the dark. So that's basically how I got here, actually, which is quite interesting. Otherwise, I could have been in Canadian by now. I arrived in Sydney on the 5th of November. There were some other Indians on my flight, and when we got to Perth Airport, the immigration officer took us off on the flight, and he stamped my passport for permanent residency, took my piece of paper and said, "You'll be on the flight to Sydney now." And I thought, oh, what happens there? He said, "Don't you worry, when you get there you'll find out." So when we got there, by the time Ashok was organised this function, which we have to give him credit for really, without him, none of this would have happened. And I think that when we got there, they said to me, "Oh, you'll be going to the Endeavour Hospital at South Coogee." My wife, Linda, and I were retired. And my daughter is here, Lana, has a university degree in journalism, and she's the CEO of the Charlie Teo Institute. I finally want to finish by saying that one of the things that I found is that I used to like poetry, sometimes I read it, Dorothy McKellar, and I used to read I Love a Sunburned Country, and that was my favourite poem, and still is. So, just outside here, the last thing I want to say, my wife and my daughter registered me as on the welcome board of the Maritime Museum when I turned 60. So, our name is on the plaque, as Ashok said, and he and I were probably one of the few people from Uganda invited to give a talk when they had new speakers as they have one of the ceremonies. I've run over time. I told you I was a rebel, so that's just to prove it. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you a story. So, Ugandan soldiers stopped the car and took all the passengers, including my dad, the only Indian in the 8-seater taxi, carrying 10 people into the forest, and started pointing guns to their heads. Fortune had it that one of the senior soldiers recognised my dad and asked him in Swahili, "Hey, what are you doing here?" He then took my dad's hand and took him back to the taxi and said, "Don't you worry, you can stay in Uganda. We need good people like you." My dad thinks that he was mistaken for my Uncle Saru. How fortunate. Not all the passengers made it back to that taxi. And the journey from Mbale to Kampala proceeded. This is the story of my parents, Muhammad Aziz and Yasmin Dins, uprooting from Uganda to Australia via Spain. My name is Shaira. I am a radiation therapist and I work at Westmead Cancer Care Centre, and I have the privilege of treating cancer care patients every day. And I'm very privileged that Australia has given us this opportunity to live and work here in Australia. So, as the daughter of my parents, Muhammad Aziz and Yasmin Din, I tell this story 50 years on their behalf, and with the utmost love and respect for my parents. We were the last ones to leave and were on the last plane as refugees. On the last day before we left, and I was only one at that time, or two, something like that, Idi Amin came with his soldiers and guns, and all the people just stood in line, and Idi Amin came to greet everyone, to say goodbye, and shook hands with each person. He said, he shook my dad's hand, and he said, "Thank you very much for leaving Uganda." According to my dad, his handshake was strong, and yet he spoke in a very gentle voice. Anyway, United Nations High Commission for Refugees managed to get us out on that last plane that was leaving Uganda on the night of the deadline, 9th November 1972. My parents waited 3 days in that line to get on that plane. They had initially organised for us to go to Austria and Belgium, but the planes were full, so we ended up in Spain. My brother Marajdin became the first refugee baby in Spain to be born there. We subsequently had to choose which country we would like to go to.
Many countries were available, but Dad said, we're going to Australia. So our family is happily settled here, and we definitely call Australia home. So thank you, Australia.
I'm a retired general practitioner from Wollongong. I've been in Uganda in various hospitals, and the last one was Gulu. Gulu is right near the border of Sudan and Uganda. When I heard that Idi Amin wanted us to get rid of us, we traveled from Gulu to Kampala. On the way, we were stopped 3 times at a gunpoint, pulling my children, 4 years old and 3 years old, and my wife, all out at a gunpoint. And they took everything from us. In the end, we reached Kampala. When I went to the passport office in Kampala, they took away my passport and said, you are not a citizen. Lie down. They made me lie down with a gunpoint on my bed. Luckily, I escaped. And when I ran to the car, still the gun was being pointed at me. I don't know how I reached to my friend's place. The High Commission, Australian High Commission told me there is no problem. He issued me a piece of paper which was a certificate of identity. And the only possession was my car. I sold the car and we bought the airfare with that money. We moved from friend to friend, because everybody was doing. And the journey from Kampala to Entebbe was very hazardous. It was only 30 kilometers, and they stopped us twice at a gunpoint, stripped off everything what we had. We reached Entebbe airport, and I thought, oh, this was good. I saw the army people from Gulu, out of all place, where I worked, and they were my patients. I was hiding behind my children and my wife on a settee. In the end, we were told to board the plane. Until we boarded the plane, I couldn't breathe until the plane lifted off. And then I started my private practice in Wollongong until I was 85 years and 3 months old. I would like to pay tribute. Well, it was not all pleasant thing, but I would like to pay tribute to Dr. Dinkar Patel, the husband of Dr. Manisha Patel. And my wife passed away too in 1999, Leela. And then Dr. Anil Rawal passed away, the husband of Talaben. And Samim passed away, that is Ashok's wife. And we had good friends, Jen and Urmila Patel. The parents of Sanjay, Amita, and Aarti.
My name is Kevin Mascarenhas, and if you don't know me, some of you might have known my parents, Ivy and John Mascarenhas. While I have my own memories of Uganda and moving to Australia, they are very much from the eyes and the perspective of a 6-year-old. So about this age group here, my 7-year-old friend here. But what they've done is shaped my life, the way I live life, and my mindset. And although Dad didn't make the last anniversary due to his failing health, and it's been 10 years since we've lost him, when it occurred to me that it's been 50 years since 1972, I very much felt his presence. And even though some of you may be looking at me now and going, gosh, you look a lot like him, I think he's here. As I've grown older, had my family and heard more of the stories, I've developed an appreciation of what a journey that must have been. To live in such a beautiful place, to have such a comfortable life, and to have that in an instant being taken away, has certainly been worth reflecting on. For the fond memories that this evening has brought back for us, for me and my family, and for the joy in seeing so many familiar faces tonight, thank you.
Thanks, Anita. I'd like to, as we reflect on our history in Australia, I'd really like to remember and pay my deepest respect and admiration in remembering all our dear elders who courageously came across from Uganda in really most challenging times, as we've heard, to build a home for us here in Australia, our new country. My recollections of our move to Australia begin in the time of January 1971 with the presidential coup of Amin Dada. And this was followed with much political strife and civil disharmony. The ensuing months saw my parents actively seeking migration to either Canada or Australia. The preference was, of course, for Australia, and especially with its recruitment advertisement describing the land of milk and honey, blue skies and warm sand, albeit that recruitment primarily for people from Caucasian countries only. Thankfully, both my parents and our parents were well-renowned teachers. Dad, Joseph De Lima, was the principal of the Shimoni Teacher Training College in Kampala, and Mum, Martha De Lima, was a well-respected high school teacher at Kololo Secondary School, which enabled them both to pass the stringent non-European migration criteria to enable us to come to Australia, which was no mean feat for those times. Unfortunately, Dad passed away last year at the age of 92, but we are lucky. Mum is here to celebrate this anniversary with you and with all of us. She's sitting over there. So we arrived in Sydney, Dad, Mum and us 4 kids, ranging in age from 11 to 4, in August 1971, and we were well dressed in our warmest Ugandan clothing, but I remember that was no match for Sydney's August winter winds. My earliest recollections of Sydney at that time was that this was a deceptively sunny place, but very cold place. And it was a strange place with all these bewildering Caucasian environment and people. So as an 11-year-old in a new culture and a new land, there were many things I missed. My childhood friendships, the local and tropical foods, the schooling system, and most importantly, our extended family. But each of these things have gradually been found again, especially as Australia has become increasingly multicultural. So I look back and I think, where am I now 50 years on? And I count myself as extremely fortunate knowing the struggles and the self-sacrificing support of my parents and our small-knit Ugandan community, who you all are here today, who have enabled me to achieve my dream of working with impoverished populations as a medical practitioner, and further to follow in my parents' footsteps as a teacher and educator
although this is in medicine. My work has been for the last 22 years in the Northern Territory on Pintabee, Yolno and Aranda lands, and that's been the most satisfying aspect of life in Australia, though it did begin with an initial response of extreme fear when I first encountered remote and traditional living First Nation peoples. This essentially triggered those fears and memories of condos and the community violence of Uganda. But that was soon surpassed, like within 48 hours, by the extreme sense of coming home, the comfortable lifestyle of Uganda, and being with people who shared a very similar familial relationship structure and climate, the red earth and the simplicity of my childhood life. It has provided me with the memories of the beauty of Uganda and the gratefulness for living in Australia with its political stability and safety. I am further blessed with one son who has also taken up the vocation of medicine, and our family now embraces a broader experience and lifestyle of rural Australia. The hearkening of Uganda is now a savoured memory of a past time, a trauma that enforced change that has proved itself to be that gift of gold. So thank you, Mum, and thank you to the committee for making this celebration so special. Thanks, everyone.
I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we're meeting on the lands and waters of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, to pay my respects to any Indigenous people that are present, and of course acknowledge the Indigenous leaders past, present and emerging. I'd like to acknowledge Dr. Ashak Nathwani, AM, the Chairman of the Steering Committee, the members of the steering committee that are here, my very good friend Simon Chan, who is both a member of the Multicultural New South Wales Advisory Board and also a member of the fundraising board, the foundation for this museum. Thank you, steering committee, for asking me to launch this book. Such a surprise and a privilege and a great honour. Ashak and I met through a mutual connection in North America. And for those of you that don't know, Ashak's influence is truly global. Through his work, he has involvement in many really significant infrastructure projects throughout the world. And that's kind of how we started our conversation. But we actually bonded over the importance of the national migration story. I had the privilege of reading a soft copy of this book. I read every word a couple of times, and it's absolutely extraordinary, and it's been brought to life tonight by hearing the people concerned actually giving you a sense of some of their experiences. What I was reflecting on listening to them was a combination of things. One was a sense of celebration, because really people have endured, they have succeeded, and this is truly wonderful. But also there is such a darkness in a lot of this. The best introduction that I can give you to this book is reading just a little bit from the back cover, from the section here. That's clever. So it begins by saying, what if you were to wake up one morning and find that you had 90 days to leave the country of your birth or the place that you had called home for most of your life? This book is a compilation of tales of trials, tribulations and triumphs, so that's the subtitle, of the victims who migrated to Australia under really extraordinary circumstances. They articulate why they chose Australia, the difficulties in Uganda, the experience of relocating, who assisted them, and also the contributions that they've made to Australia in their time here. There's 37 stories, and it's organised helpfully into 3 sections. And there's also a very helpful description of what was going on in the political environment, both in Uganda and globally and in Australia as well. There's 150 colour photos, and what was interesting for me, some really precious documents, a couple of telegrams from the Minister for Immigration, which were beautiful to see, some interesting newspaper articles, and every page has got something on there that has an element of the profound about it. The main strength of this book, of course, is that it's the voices of the immigrants themselves that are telling the stories, or the descendants of those immigrants. African friends and colleagues who opposed him, that's Amin, disappeared and were never found or were killed. One of these people was my boss in the hospital, who was a Ugandan African gynaecologist. He was dragged out of the operating theatre in the middle of an operation by Amin's security police, tied to a tree outside the hospital and shot dead while we were watching out the window of the operating theatre. There's also wonderful examples of life-changing kindnesses in this book. The Australian government was unbelievably kind to the refugees, providing accommodation and meals for the entire duration there. They even issued fur coats, hats and books to each family to keep us warm in the cold winter months. As a young child, the refugee camp felt like one big holiday adventure. We didn't have to attend school, and there were plenty of other children to play with. I remember playing in the snow for the very first time. Arif Panjwani. There's also some really funny stuff in this book, and I guess we've all got a sense of humour, and we're probably already looking for some lightness after some of these stories. This one had me laughing out loud on the bus. We were greeted with a warm reception at the airport and at the hostel. The welcoming staff were told that we were non-white, and they asked if we spoke English. In hindsight, we should have said we learnt it on the plane coming to Australia. That was Carmen D'Souza. We had the first coloured person at the Endeavour migrant hostel in this group. We had the beginnings of the Ismaili Muslim settlement in Australia in this group. 2 visits by His Highness the Aga Khan as a result of people in this group. The first Gujarati Indian wedding in Sydney from this group. The formation of the Goan Overseas Association. And of course also I'd be remiss to not acknowledge the Whitlam government, and in particular Al Grasby, and the way in which the change in policy, the total dismantling of white Australia actually was so important here. I was really proud, and everyone in this room should feel proud, that at one point Australia was the only country in the world that was willing to accept someone with a one-way travel document from a stateless person, someone from Uganda. If only that sort of sentiment prevailed now. Finally, just acknowledging all the contributors to this book, as well as the steering committee members, the Piarelli, Gulamali Nanjit Nathwani family, and the Nanjani Family Foundation. It's really important these stories are shared. So now, after that very long speech, and thank you for your indulgence, I'm so delighted to launch 50-Year Journey, Australians from Uganda, Tales of Trials, Tribulations and Triumphs.
So first of all, welcome to the Australian National Maritime Museum. It's Australia's Museum of the Sea. Visitors are always surprised to discover that we are in fact Australia's only national migration museum. Australia is one of the world's great migration nations, receiving more than 10 million migrants since 1788. Most of us descend from migrants. 29% of our population was born overseas, and more than 50% were either born overseas themselves or have a parent that was born overseas. Migration is one of the key pillars of the museum's charter, and the collection and presentation of stories of migrants to these countries is one of the most important responsibilities of the museum. Sharing these stories builds knowledge, understanding, and empathy, and this contributes to both understanding and social cohesion. I would like now to introduce you to Matt Lee, Manager of VIP Relations, who would like to make a presentation to ASHAC on behalf of the museum. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I don't know how many of you have been to the museum before, but behind you is HMAS Onslow. Now, this is an Oberon-class submarine. Now, we're one of the very few places in the world that has a submarine that's actually in the water that you can actually go on. Some places have submarines that are sort of on the side, but to be actually in the water, we're very lucky to have one. And it's one of the major draw cards of being here at the National Maritime Museum, is being able to go onto our submarine. But floating submarines, they're basically just big black metal boxes, and they're not designed for Australian summers. During the summer, they get very, very hot. It's like being literally an oven. And when it gets really hot, we have to shut our submarine. Otherwise, we're sort of like boiling our volunteers and our visitors, which isn't a good look. And so it's thanks to ASHAC and his family's generosity and gift that has enabled a brand new, specifically designed air conditioning system to be installed in our submarine, which has enabled us to keep the submarine open longer, so we do not have to shut it if it gets too hot, and it allows many more visitors to experience our submarine. So we want to thank ASHAC, Amin, and Rihanna Nathwani for their generosity and in honour of Samin Nathwani. And on behalf of the museum, and in acknowledgement of this generous gift, we would like to present ASHAC, who has one of the best smiles and best laughs that I've ever met, with a token of our appreciation. So, thank you so much, ASHAC.
So we sincerely thank you, Simon, for outlining the pluralistic role that the museum plays in our multicultural Australia. Thank you, Matt, for the museum's acknowledgement of the contribution by the Nathwani family. On behalf of the committee, I too extend sincere gratitude to the Nathwani family for their dedication and efforts in so many fields, ranging from initiating and providing the leadership in organising this commemorative book and this function, to serving the community through the Rotary movement, to providing music for the Navratri folk dancing for the Gujarati community, and for playing a pioneering role in the establishment of the Ishmaeli community in Australia and New Zealand. Now, we've received several messages of congratulations, which will be displayed on the screen later. However, I'd like to share one message that captures the moment we've just experienced. It's from the Honourable Mobina Jafer QC, Federal Canadian Senator, representing British Columbia. Dear Chairman and members of the Australians of Uganda 50 Years Armed Steering Committee, I extend my heartfelt congratulations and best wishes to you and your guests commemorating the 50th anniversary of the settlement in Australia of the Asians expelled from Uganda by Idi Amin in 1972. Being a victim myself of that event, where my family too had to leave Uganda in challenging circumstances, I can relate to all the stories so eloquently articulated in the commemorative issue, excerpts of which you forwarded to me. It is an excellent presentation of recorded history, which I'm sure future generations will treasure. All the tales have a common message of how Australia welcomed the migrants, who continue in so many ways to give back to the country they now call home. It was enlightening to read the introduction in the book, covering the political scenes both in Uganda and in Australia in 1972, taken from the previous compilation of the late Samuel Mafwani. Samuel and I were classmates at the Anglican School in Kampala, and I have very fond memories of our times together. May I once again congratulate you on an excellent publication and wish you and all those participating in the celebration of this commemoration all the very best. And signed, the Honourable Mabina Jennifer, Senator for British Columbia. It is now my pleasure to invite to the podium our Australian to Uganda 50 Steering Committee Chairman, Ashak Nafwani AM. Some of you may not know this, Ashak arrived in Australia on the 10th of October 1972 at 5 p.m. and 50 years later to the day and indeed to the hour, this coming Monday, the 10th of October 2022 at 5 p.m, Ashak is going to be awarded his PhD at the graduation ceremony at the University of Sydney. That's a true eternity standard that has to go down at the conference. Congratulations and welcome, Dr.
Thank you very much. I too walked the path and arrived here with only one suitcase. In challenging circumstances, having to leave Uganda, my birthplace. I came to this land of promise at the tender age of 23. Uganda Army could not take away my education or my degree. The engineering degree that provided opportunities to me, little did I know that it would lead to being awarded a PhD. My 50-year journey has been with trials and tribulations, dotted with such joyous triumphs and celebrations. My life that has also presented various hardships, overcome by hard work, determination, and friendships. The saddest day in my life was the passing of Shamim, my wife, the insidious motor neuron disease that tragically took her life. She was my inspiration and an integral part of my every achievement. Receiving Member of the Order of Australia with her was a priceless moment. Other priceless moments have been births of Amin and Rehana, my children, and Zain, Kian, Azra, Aiden, and Nala Shamim, my 5 grandchildren. I consider myself extremely fortunate to be surrounded by such a loving family and together with so many friends who are truly supportive that I'm living quite a happy life. Thank you, God. Now, I was deeply touched by the acknowledgement afforded to me and my family by the management of the museum. Thank you very much. This will remain definitely as one of the treasured mementos. I'd also like to thank the management and staff of the museum for all your support and assistance, and particularly to the catering staff. Thank you so much. I would like to extend my gratitude to my committee members for their hard work. Arif Panjwani, Amita Patel, Chandrakant Shah couldn't be here, but he's represented by his brother Ramdik, Kiran Patke, Lynette Gomes, Sinsaira Hadwani, who is selling the books. Thank you all for the contributions to the stories, and to Sarita Gold and Kate Oliver, who are responsible for the design of that book. Thank you. Also, thanks to Mona for going through all the stories and editing them for us. Thank you, Mona. To make this an enjoyable evening and cost-free for most of us, my special thanks go to our major donor. He happens to be my eldest brother, Darling Harbour Nanji and the Nanji Family Foundation. He's based in Canada. And I'd like to acknowledge the great philanthropic work that the foundation is doing. I also thank Dr. Kiran Patke, as well as many of you who have contributed towards the cost of the function and of the publishing of the book, because it is subsidized. I thank you all for coming and making this occasion a memorable commemoration. Enjoy the rest of the evening and hopefully the fireworks as well. Thank you for coming.